Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Guide, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. Today, we're going to talk about preparing for the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic, making good plans about it. So stay tuned. Now, what I want to focus on is the one huge mistake that everybody makes in planning for the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic, preparing for it. And that is a problem that stems from the fact that our official government guidelines are actually very misguided in many ways. So if you're following the official government guidelines from the Center for Disease Control, CDC, and so on, you are actually not nearly as prepared as you might believe you are. And that is a serious problem. So let's talk a little bit about the government guidelines, why they're wrong, why we make such mistakes, and how you can prepare. And we'll talk about both households and business. So you want to make the best decisions and the most profitable ones for your household and for your business. So let's talk about government guidelines for households first. They tell you to be prepared for illness, for a 2-week illness of COVID-19 if you get sick with it. If you need to stock up on various sorts of consumable supplies for 2 weeks, if you get sick with it. You need to be prepared to work from home because if you get sick, you will be quarantined. Some employers are telling companies to work from home, and you need to make plans for temporary school closures. Take care of your kids. What are you going to do with them, right? So, and finally, they're also telling you to prepare for the psychological impact of the situation of all of these things, the earlier 4 things that I mentioned. What about for businesses? What's the government telling businesses to do? What's the CDC telling them to do? You need to cross-train employees in case your critical ones get sick for a couple of weeks. Prepare for various event cancellations, whether it's events you run or events to which you're going. You want to make a disease outbreak plan in case something happens in your local area, that there's a disease outbreak in your local area. Now, think about this. Is this good enough? And it's really not. It's really not nearly good enough for the facts about the coronavirus. So, what are the facts? It's highly contagious, very contagious. Every person who gets sick infects 3 to 5 others on average. So that's 3 to 5 other people infected. Now, the disease rate doubles every 4 to 6 days. So that's really bad for contagion. It's also much more deadly than the flu, especially for people who have underlying conditions, like everything from ranging from asthma to weakened immune systems, from chemotherapy, HIV, and so on, people who have high blood pressure, and people who have the condition of being older adults, people over 60. Now, even over 50, if you look at the death rate of people over 50, it's an average of 5% death rate. And this goes higher the higher you go. So if it's higher, the average death rate is higher over 60, over 70, over 80, and so on. I mean, over 80, the death rate is about 15%, according to the latest statistics of the people who we tested and who we know are infected. So it's very deadly, much more deadly than the flu, maybe about 10 or more times deadly than the flu, but let's say about 10 times. And the flu kills something like every year, maybe about 50,000 Americans every year. So if it's 10 times as deadly, and that would be 500,000 Americans every year. And of course, many more people around the world, and that's really bad. There's unfortunately no vaccine available for the COVID-19, unlike the flu, which we do have a vaccine for. So this makes the COVID-19 much more deadly. And of course, we also don't have natural herd immunity for people who didn't have COVID-19 before. It's a completely new virus. So what's wrong with these government guidelines? The thing that's most wrong with these government guidelines, fundamentally terribly wrong, is that they prepare you for temporary disruption. A couple of weeks or something like that, maybe a month, although if you have 2 weeks of supplies of food, you won't have enough for a month. So realistically, they prepare you for 2 weeks. That's incredibly optimistic. That's like getting 10 coin flips and getting 10 heads in a row. Very optimistic, incredibly unlikely. What's most likely to happen is that there will be a long-term disruption. There will be a very long-term disruption, and the government is not telling you, whether households or businesses or organizations of all sorts, not simply businesses, but nonprofits, churches, and so on, to prepare for the long term. And preparing for the long term, you need to be realistic. not super optimistic, not wildly optimistic when you're preparing for the long term of COVID-19. Now, I want to talk a little bit about why such bad advice is common, why we have such bad advice from advice givers, whether it's from business gurus or government officials or anybody else. Well, such bad advice comes from dangerous judgment errors. Dangerous judgment errors are called cognitive biases, that cognitive neuroscientists and behavioral economists like myself call them cognitive biases. And these are mental blind spots in our decision-making process that come from our evolutionary background. So our savanna ancestors are hunter-gatherers. That's the background for which our brain is really evolved for which the emotional part of our brain is evolved for. And so when we go with our gut, when we follow our intuitions, which people very much do when they make decisions, unfortunately, unless they're taught how to do differently, they make these dangerous judgment errors. And it also comes from the specific details of the structure of our brains, how our brain is wired, how we process information, also causes us to fall into these dangerous judgment errors if we don't watch out for them. We experience a very strong fight or flight response to threats. And this comes from a combination of our evolutionary background and from how our brain is wired, but especially the fight or flight response from the evolutionary background. It was life-saving for our hunter-gatherer ancestors who lived in small tribes of 15 people to 150 people and did hunting and gathering when they lived in that environment in the ancestral savanna. The risks in that savanna were immediate. They were immediate and they were intense. They had to face saber-toothed tigers. That's why you hear of it as the saber-toothed tiger response. They had to jump at 100 shadows in order to successfully escape from that one saber-toothed tiger. Now, the fight or flight response to threats is actually quite dangerous for us in the modern world because the kind of risks we face are overwhelmingly not saber-toothed tigers. You might have noticed there are many less saber-toothed tigers in the modern world. The risks are actually long-term. The vast majority of the risks that we face, large majority, are long-term risks where we're concerned about our lives, our activities, what we're going to do, our relationships, our careers, and so on. And they're uncertain. There's much more ambiguity. It's not like there's a lion out there or you hear the roaring of a lion. You're not sure what to do. And the risks instead come to us from emails, from notifications, from messages, from information that we receive, to which we unfortunately react as though it's a saber-toothed tiger. We react with a very short-term response, just like the short-term guidelines of the government, panic buying and so on, instead of thinking about the long term and thinking about changing our lives and our activities for the long term. There are specifically 3 dangerous judgment errors, 3 cognitive biases that are most at play and most at fault in our response. The normalcy bias, the planning fallacy, and hyperbolic discounting. Let's go over them one by one. The normalcy bias has to do with our assumption that the future will be normal, that it will be like today. That's what we assume. That's what our heart, our brain, our gut, our intuition, our whatever you call it, our instincts assume. And that leads us to forecast the short-term future based on the short-term past. So we perceive the immediate future to be like the immediate past, and very often it's not going to be like the immediate past. That's bad. So we greatly underestimate the likelihood and the impact of major disruptors, and the likelihood and impact of these major disruptors have on our lives and the lives of people around us. Those are really not accounted for in our thinking processes. Second one, planning fallacy. Now, we are all very confident about our plans. We assume that the future will go according to plan because we like ourselves, we like our plans, we're confident about ourselves, we're good people, so therefore our plans must be good, right? Well, unfortunately, that's not the case. Our plans often don't survive contact with the enemy, so we're not nearly as prepared for problems and risks as we should be. And we don't invest nearly enough resources for the kind of plans, for the kind of things that we will actually need to accomplish in the future. So we don't have enough resources as a result. We're delayed, late, and so on. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough information that's needed to address a project, or social capital, connections that we need to accomplish certain projects, certain activities. And finally, last but not least, is hyperbolic discounting. That's a fancy word for excessive ignorance, excessive discounting of the future. So we don't pay not nearly enough attention to the future because we feel our gut reaction responds to the immediate short-term future, what's going on tomorrow or what's going on an hour from now, as much more important than what's happening in a week from now or a month from now. And that's a very big problem because it causes us to undercount much bigger outcomes in the long-term future over short-term rewards. So we tend to prefer much less impactful short-term rewards over much more impactful long-term rewards. And the same for short-term pains. We prefer much smaller short-term pains at the cost of much bigger long-term pains. So this is a big problem. We prefer to avoid these short-term pains at the cost of suffering much larger long-term pains. This is not good. This is not what we should be doing. So we tend to greatly underestimate the long-term outcomes and impacts of various activities, that we do right now and that are internal to us, that we are deciding to do, and also various activities that are external to our context that we're thinking about accomplishing or that we're seeing around ourselves, like various sorts of problems. So these are the 3 dangerous judgment errors that are going to be seriously a plague for us in making good decisions about the future. And we need to overcome these dangerous judgment errors. And we can if we train ourselves to do it. So this is where you transition from that natural, primitive, savage state in which our hunter-gatherers are and in which we tend to make our decisions, to the civilized state. And what does it mean to be civilized? It means to be adapted to the modern world. So you need to go against your intuitions to be civilized and to be adapted to the modern world. That's what you need to do. Our intuitions, again, remember, they evolved to help early humans survive. And our brains aren't really wired for today's modern world. So for example, in the ancient world, in the ancient savannah, it was very important for our hunter-gatherers, whenever they came across a source of sugar for our ancestors, to eat as much of it as possible. When they came across some honey or some apples, whatever, they need to eat as much of it as they could in order to survive. So we're the descendants of all of those who ate as much sugar as they could to survive, and we have those instincts inborn in us. Those, just like the fight or flight response instincts, are inborn in us. They're genetic. The instinct to eat as much sugar as possible is inborn in us. So now we tend to very much prefer some delicious donuts over much healthier desserts like fruit, like those delicious peaches, but they're not nearly as appealing looking as those donuts. So that is a big problem for us because the donuts are much less healthy. And food companies, of course, make much more money when they sell us donuts or selling us peaches. So they really push donuts on us. And that's a big problem for our health. There's a reason they sell donuts in a box of dozen donuts. 1 donut is okay, maybe 2 donuts, but you got to stop at the 3rd donut. Don't eat the dozen donuts. Well, it's very hard not to eat the dozen donuts when they're staring you right in the face because of those natural, primitive, savage impulses. Now, the civilized thing to do in the modern world is to stop yourself at the 2 donuts, and preferably, even better, of course, is to instead eat some peaches. But that's really hard to do. Just as hard as it is to fight the fight or flight responses on our short-term intuitions, on including contingencies into our plans, on focusing on recognizing that the short-term future may be very different than the short-term past, depending on the situation. So these are all very difficult things that go against our intuitions, but you need to go against your gut reactions. Don't go with your gut if you want to make good decisions about the future. And this brings us back to planning for the impact of COVID-19. Let's talk a little bit more about the facts of COVID-19. So we talked a little bit about the facts before, but now we can enrich that conversation. It's very unlikely to pass in a couple of months. Those who say, oh, it'll be gone, by April or latest by May, those people are really, can't say it nicer than delusional. They are incredibly wildly optimistic. That will not happen. This COVID-19 epidemic it's very unlikely to go away in the summer. It's unlikely to be seasonal based on the fact that it's spreading in warm countries. But even if it is seasonal, even if it tamps down in the summer, it will come roaring back in September, October, November, because we will not be able to fix it. We won't have a vaccine. We won't have a vaccine for it, and we will not have a vaccine for at least the next 2 years. The earliest we can realistically have a vaccine is by the end of 2021. And that's assuming everything goes swimmingly and we have a very optimistic scenario. Much more realistically, we will have a vaccine widely available. So created, approved, mass-produced within the next 4 years. So maybe by the end of 2024, 2025 even. So we have to live with this. We have to live with COVID-19. And that's why this vaccine is also something that we have to think about. It may also work like the flu vaccine, which provides only a weak immunity, something that is not going to actually help us that much if it only provides a weak immunity. If it decreases the fatality rate by 50%, which is what the flu vaccine does. It prevents about 50% of the infections or so. So if the COVID-19 vaccine is as weak as the flu vaccine, we'll have to keep living with it for our whole lives. So this might be the new normal for our whole lives. It's definitely the new normal for the next 4 years, realistically speaking, until there's a widely available vaccine. If it's a great vaccine, fixes everything, that's great. If it's not, if it's a weak vaccine, we have a new normal. And we are living in that new normal until the end of our days. So how can you prepare for this new normal? You can't think short term. This is incredibly important. Unlike the government guidelines, which prepare you for the short-term scenario, you need to think about long-term. And that's the critical thing you need to do. You need to think through what will your life be like, given that the COVID-19 situation is going to be around for a number of years, maybe your whole lifetime. You need to think about these years instead of the weeks. So that's how you got to think. So individuals and families, there are a number of things that you can do in the context of individuals and families, households, that you can prepare. You want to think about supplies, you want to think about all your relatives, your broader community, your health and their health, your children, if you have any, pets if you don't. If you don't have children or pets, like what are you? Then you got to think about your career. So those are the things you want to think about as individuals and families, households. Supplies, what does that mean? Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff you need to be thinking about. You need to be thinking about food, households goods, especially disinfectants in the current sanitize everything environment. You want to think about medications for yourself if you're taking medications, baby care of various sorts, supplies for baby care, child care of various sorts, pet supplies, of course, if you have pets, hobbies of whatever you're doing, your hobbies. And you want to think about your hobbies changing around your hobbies to make sure that they're not dependent on other people. And projects, again, make sure you have projects that are independent on other people. This might be a good time to think about investing in being more DIY and fixing up your house or something like that. Stock them up for 3 months. 3 months, not 2 weeks. Government is telling you to do 2 weeks. I'm telling you to do 3 months. This is something that really makes a lot of sense because you need to be prepared for a whole variety of options, realistic, pessimistic options for the next few years. You got to be prepared for an illness. For more serious cases of COVID-19, the recovery period is about 6 weeks. So 6 weeks, that means you need to have supplies for 6 weeks for that long recovery period. And if you have more than one person in the household, what's likely to happen is that one person gets sick and then they get the other person in their household sick. And you really shouldn't be going out while the other person is sick. So let's say you take 6 weeks, they take 6 weeks, that's going to be, and if you have other members of your household, that's going to be over 2 months of food and other supplies that you will consume. You need to be prepared for shortages. What if there are shortages of various sorts in your area? We are already experiencing a number of shortages of various household supplies of food and so on. And you want to think about what was happening in Wuhan in China when it was quarantined. It's really experiencing shortages of various basic goods, very fundamental goods. They aren't able to deliver these. It's a city of 10 million people, very industrial city now, comparable to, let's say, Detroit or Denver here in the US. So you want to be thinking about shortages and addressing those in advance. Social distancing. You want to be able to distance yourself from other people, and you don't need to go, hopefully you won't need to go to the store when your toilet paper runs out, and you don't want to be in that situation. You want to be able to distance yourself from people, especially if there's a local outbreak, quarantine in your area. And finally, you might want to help others. So let's say you yourself consume, in more of an emergency situation, 2 months of supplies. And you have 1 month of supplies for helping others around you, helping relatives, helping friends, helping folks you care about who weren't able or weren't smart or weren't savvy enough or listened too much to government guidelines to get supplies. So that's that. Relatives. You got to think about your relatives. You want to provide social support while maintaining social distancing. So this is a tough line to negotiate, and you want to start thinking about right now. How can you make sure that you effectively socially distance yourself from relatives, especially if you're elderly or if they're elderly, which by elderly, the government, realistically, the numbers mean over 50. So I don't mean elderly, I mean older adults, so people over 50. So maintaining social distance if you're over 50 or if they're over 50 especially. Then those are the people with a high risk of a serious illness, and of course people who have various underlying health conditions. You want to maintain social distance if you have a health condition or if they have a health condition, and in general if you don't want to get sick and then get others in your household sick. You want to maintain social distance. So you want to also make plans to help your relatives in case they get sick. How can you help them? Maybe you can deliver some food, leave it outside their door. That could be nice. So that's why it's good to have quarantine, to have supplies in case, quarantine, they aren't able to get out. And that's when you can help. You want to avoid visiting those over 60. So I talked about over 50, but it really gets bad over 60. So focusing on over 60, not visiting them while there's an outbreak in your area, while there are a number of coronavirus cases in your area, is going to be very smart, because you can't tell when you're infected with the coronavirus. The early symptoms of the coronavirus are nothing, literally nothing. You're already infectious while you're not feeling sick at all. And for many people, the coronavirus symptoms that they feel are going to be incredibly mild. Maybe a little bit of the sniffles. That's all. That's what you might feel, and you might actually be sick with the coronavirus. And so that's why you shouldn't visit people over 60. Don't kill grandma. I'm kind of joking, but kind of serious. Don't visit them. Don't kill grandma, because grandma can get sick and die, and with you unintentionally. Do you want to be in that position? You don't. So don't kill grandma. Next, your broader community. And that includes, of course, friends, neighbors. We talked about relatives in more depth, but people who aren't part of your nuclear relatives, maybe your third cousin twice removed. Community groups of various sorts, whereas it's clubs, it's churches, various values-based groups, secular groups, whatever you care about. So your various community groups and the religious congregations. So various, and of course secular congregations, whatever your belief system is. You want to look for ways to fulfill social needs without in-person interactions. So think about that. What will you be able to do? How can you transition your social interactions to virtual? Virtual interactions, the phone may be a source of danger. We talked about that earlier, but it's also a source of connection. A number of, for example, religious congregations are right now switching their services to be online services. And a number of community groups, right now I'm a part of a small community group of 5 people that meets every month. And what we're doing is we're trying out meeting instead of in person. This is a close, intimate group. We only have one person over 50 and he's not over 60. So we are still trying to meet virtually, experiment with how that is. If we can't make it work virtually, we'll try to do social distancing, which means kind of trying to sit at least 6 feet apart, ideally 8 to 10 feet apart, away from each other in social presence. You want to prepare to respond to other people not having very good decisions. So this is something that you need to be ready for. They are not going to be necessarily nearly as savvy as you are. They can practice poor hygiene, not be healthy, and not wash their hands nearly as often as they should with soap and water for 20 seconds. You've probably heard people say this and write this like a whole bunch of times. But there are going to be some people who ignore that. They might not be nearly as prepared. They might think, not a big deal. My news source told me this is just a big fake and I shouldn't be paying attention to, fake news, right? So they might be having these unfortunate thought patterns. They might not be doing social distancing. They might be thinking that, hey, this doesn't apply to me. Social distancing is good for everyone except myself. Not a good strategy, but many people might do it. Finally, they might be criticizing your decisions. So they are going to approach you and say, hey, what's up? Why are you doing this super preparation stuff? What are you, a prepper or something? What are you, crazy? Government told us to only do 2 weeks. Well, the government is wildly optimistic. Then, next, your own health and wellness. So you got to think about yourself, your health and wellness. That means having a healthy diet in the context of various shortages, various supply chain disruptions. Well, how can you have a healthy diet? So make sure that whatever you get at home, that you're not just getting like cans of, I don't know, tuna. So too much tuna is not going to be good for you. You want a balanced diet. So have a healthy diet of whatever you get at home, those ready-to-eat kits, whatever you're getting, make sure that they have a balanced diet. Exercise. Make sure you're able to get exercise. A lot of gyms have been closed. A lot of various other health clubs have been closed. So you want to make sure that you're able to get exercise of various sorts at home. Figure out how you can exercise effectively at home. Have a regime at home. Maybe you can go out and do some walking and running in places where there aren't other people. That's also cool. But don't go to don't go to gyms, don't go to various fitness clubs. Spend time outdoors. So talking about walking, talking about running, those are good ways of spending time outdoors. And you might spend it with members of your nuclear household, walking with them. I walk with my wife daily. That's a really good habit that we're definitely going to keep in the context of the coronavirus pandemic. And we're going to make sure to walk in places where there are less people around us. Entertainment. You might be pretty pissed that a number of entertainment venues are closed, whether it's sports venues, stadiums, NBA teams aren't playing anymore, whether it's theaters, whether it's museums, whatever your flavor is. They are going to be closed. Libraries, they're going to be closed. And that's just that. They'll be closed for a long time. Don't hope that they will reopen. So figure out what kind of entertainment you can pursue that doesn't rely on these venues. What can you do effectively? Stress relief. Figure out how you can relieve your stress. We are in a pretty stressed situation right now, and it's not fun. So you got to figure out what are the ways that you can relieve your stress in ways that are in accordance with the pandemic situation. Finally, seek professional help. I strongly recommend this. So from everything, let's say, healthy diet. So you got to check out with a nutritionist. Go visit one. Sit, 8 feet away from their office while you go there. Figure out exercise. Talk to a fitness trainer about how you can get exercise in your house. Time outdoors, you probably don't need guidance for that. Entertainment, maybe there's going to be someone who is going to be able to help you with various entertainment options at home. And stress relief. There's going to be a number of professional help options for stress relief. Especially important is going to be therapy of various psychotherapy. You can consider getting psychiatric help, so medications, but especially talk therapy. That's very helpful, especially cognitive behavioral therapy has been shown to be very effective, and this is a very stressful time. So this sort of therapy might be really helpful for you to cope. Next, talking about children, those little rugrats, how can you deal with them? Well, you might be dealing with big rugrats who are moving back from university because universities have been closed to back home. So everyone from the rugrats to like rebellious teenagers to young adults in their early 20s who are attending college and moving back home because of the current situation. You want to prepare for long-term closures of schools, daycares, universities, all of that sort. Right now, a number of states have not closed their schools yet. A number of states have already either closed their schools yet, but most of the states that have closed their schools have said it's for a couple of weeks or something like that. Don't believe that. Be prepared for closures until the end of this academic year and very well potentially through the end of 2020. So schools might be closed through the end of 2020. It's quite possible. Hopefully it won't happen, but it might happen, so be prepared for that. Childcare, so you got to be prepared for childcare. How will you care for your child if schools are indeed closed for the academic year? And then what if they keep being closed in the fall of 2020? What are you going to do then? Think about it. Prepare for it. How are you going to educate your children? There's some schools are providing online learning opportunities, and that's good enough for older kids, teenagers, especially young adults, but it's not really good enough for kids. So you got to think about how you're going to educate your kids at home. Right now, the homeschoolers really have a great advantage over regular schoolers. So you got to think about what are their methodologies? Copy their methodologies, learn about them, and adapt them. Health, how you take care of the health of your children, both in the coronavirus epidemic, but also in terms of the school. I mean, school provides everything from lunches to health checkups. So think about how you'll take care of your children's health. Playtime. I mean, right now, a lot of kids aren't getting playtime with others. So this is serious. Maybe you can play with them more, interact with them more, give them some support. Social needs, same thing. Think about how you can help your kids get their social needs met, maybe more over online, virtually. And you'll also want to think about protections for your kids when they're getting their social needs met online. Entertainment, you got to entertain your kids, otherwise they'll be crawling all over you. You don't want that. So figure out how you can entertain your kids effectively. Maybe this is a good time to get some pets that your kids can take care of and entertain themselves with, and that will be a good way of keeping them out of your hair, and also for them to learn how to take care of another living being, which is not a bad thing for kids. Finally, emotional support. The pet might provide your kids with emotional support, but you got to especially yourself provide them with emotional support. They can sense how stressed, even young kids can sense how stressed adults are in this environment. This is not great for them. And you got to support them in this environment of stressfulness, of the pandemic, of a lot of worry, a lot of disruption. Now, last but far from least is your career. You got to think about your career. Does your work put you at increased risk of infection? Now, some people's work, fortunately, let them go and said, go home, whatever. Some people's work was effectively closed, bars, restaurants. Some people still need to work in whatever they're working. Let's say if you're working in logistics, much of that work can be done from home. And in some cases, employees are kind of jerkish and call for employees to come to work, even though the employees don't need to be working. Not going to go into details, but I know some of the people who I interact with are working from an office when they really should be working from home, and that's unfortunate. Of course, it could be about your specific industry or your profession. If you work, like I said, in various forms of logistics, packing, warehouse work, if you work, let's say, driving people, mass transit, something like that, you might not be able to work from home. So this is a good time to think about whether you might consider a career switch, job switch, if your particular boss is not handling this very well, or career switch to a different career. Considering that the coronavirus pandemic will be around for the next several years, think about investing in a career switch. Something, perhaps start a side hustle, one that will be themed around the kind of things that you want to shift to, that will be something that will be a good fit for the new normal, considering that the coronavirus pandemic will be around at least for the next several years, potentially for the rest of your lifetime. How can you make a career shift that will be adaptive to the new environment? So that's for individuals. What about if you're working as a leader in a business? How can you prepare your business? Whether you're a small business owner or the CEO of a large conglomerate or a mid-level manager who has profit and loss responsibilities, or let's say you're the COO or something like that who can influence the rest of the leadership team. You want to change how you do business. This is fundamental. This is critical. This is really important. This will be around not for the next couple of weeks, but for the next couple of years. So think years, not weeks. And it might be around for the rest of your lifetime. So for the future will have far less face-to-face interactions, again, at least the next several years, like quite possibly the rest of your lifetime. So it will have much less face-to-face interaction. So you want to think about fundamental transformations, not short-term emergencies, not emergency plans. You got to think about how you're going to change your business model. That's what you got to be thinking about. Changing your business model, how to deal with disruptions, how you're going to handle networking, what will you do for your employees, what about handling black swans, and last but not least, beating your competition. One of the favorite topics of my coaching and consulting clients. So I work as a coaching consultant for leaders. That's my day job, do disaster avoidance for them. So having a lot of work right now. And beating your competition is one of the biggest priorities that they face. So talking first about business models. You want to understand that society will undergo a wide variety of social norm changes to be much more oriented to digital interaction, social distancing, much less going out, much more in nuclear family orientation, small groups, not large gatherings. How will that change your business model at all levels of the organization? So that is something that you want to be thinking about. That your internal business model, how your internal business operations work, and of course your external business model, how you deliver whatever you deliver for your clients. Whether it's a product, service, combination of both, how will that change? You want to especially explore creative ways to shift to virtual delivery, virtual interactions that will enable social distancing for your employees, for your clients. Otherwise, you're not going to be in business for too long, unless your business is super dependent on it. But even then, I'm guessing that there will be some creative entrepreneurs who find a way to do what you're doing in socially distanced virtual way of some sort. So you gotta get there first. Don't get there last. Next, think about the kind of disruptions that are going to be associated with COVID-19. This is especially important for service providers because they do a lot of their service face-to-face. Professional services. I mean, I do quite a bit of consulting and coaching and speaking and training face-to-face. I already had a bunch of speaking engagements canceled, including one literally that as I was about to get on the airplane to go give a speech, and a bunch of others canceled in advance. So that means that I'm really shifting a lot of my focus to online interactions, online engagements. And if you're a service professional, you got to be doing the same thing, whether you're a consultant like I am, whether management consultant, whether speaker trainer, whether you are an accountant, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a banker. Think about how to change many of your interactions to be much more oriented toward online rather than face-to-face. Deal with event cancellations. Anticipate that there will be a whole bunch of event cancellations of various sorts in the near future, that a lot of people will be deluded about the likelihood that their events will be canceled. I know, unfortunately, a number of people with whom I'm in touch with professionally who still think that their events will be held. They are very wrong, but this is what they think, and you got to be prepared for people who think the same way. For a lot of travel disruptions. Now, there have been some rumors going on that even US domestic travel, of course, will be disrupted. But of course, a lot of international travel has already been disrupted. And the US domestic travel has been already disrupted, but that's due to consumer demand. It might be actually limited, banned by government decree. It's possible. We'll see what happens, depends on the situation, but you got to be prepared for various sorts of travel disruptions. Next, think about relationship building. Relationship building inside and outside your organization is going to be greatly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So that is a big problem because it's so essential to build good relationships for effective business. I'm not going to do business, good, important business, service professional, kind of that collaboration business with a person I don't trust. And with a person who I trust, that depends on building up the relationship. So you got to look for ways to cultivate those relationships without face-to-face meetings, without those events. Figure out how to do virtual events, figure out how to do virtual meetings, because that will be how you will cultivate your relationships. Now think about virtual, I don't mean only the way, by doing video calls. You also think about LinkedIn as a major platform. Text, LinkedIn messages, various forms of interactions, relationship building. I mean, I have a co-author with my book, this is before the pandemic, with whom I had no face-to-face interactions and no video calls. I only had a phone call where we agreed to collaborate on a book, and then we did all of our collaboration by text, and it worked out really well. So if I can do it, you can do it. Next, think about your employees. How are you going to handle your employees? A lot of people are in the most seriously impacted industries, whether airplanes, cruise ships, hotels, hospitalities, bars, sports teams, theaters are really feeling that right now. If you're in those industries, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not, your employees will still be impacted in many serious ways. We'll be transitioning to working from home. Hopefully, a lot of your employees are already working from home, if not all of them. Ideally, you'll try to get as many people working from home as possible, and the rest you'll do social distancing. So for those working from home, you want to offer various forms of financial support for necessary equipment and services. Don't just say, go work at home, that's all. Offer them financial support, offer them various services. Make sure that the data that they use is secure and that it's not going to be hacked. Trust me, there is going to be a lot more efforts to hack computer data from companies in the context of this pandemic. And so you got to especially focus on your computer security in this environment. You want to shift your meetings and events to various virtual platforms. I don't have a strong preference for which ones, but Zoom, Skype, whatever you're going to be using, those are things that you want to go to meeting. You want to be thinking about and experimenting with shifting your meetings to those sorts of venues. So try to invest in one platform and focus, get a business account, get everyone to use that business account. Look for new opportunities for bonding and relationship building that you're not currently thinking about. Be creative, think outside the box. Let your employees do so. And support your employees and their families making preparations, please. Forward them this video, forward them this information, because a lot of them will not know. They will be trusting government guidelines too much, so they will be greatly underprepared. Then, you want to think about black swan events. Now, what are black swan events? These are unknown events. Now, the coronavirus pandemic is kind of a black swan event in the sense that we didn't anticipate it, but it's also kind of a gray rhino, meaning an event that we could have anticipated because we had various SARS, H1N1, various sorts of epidemics like this, the Ebola virus, and we can anticipate that there will be others. So it's a kind of a combination between those. You want to reserve extra resources to deal with not only the current one, but not only what you're feeling right now, the disruptions from COVID-19, but future unanticipated disruptions. There's a number of things that I outlined, and these are things that you now are knowing and thinking about, but there might be others that I'm not thinking about, I don't know about. So you want to reserve extra resources of money, time, information, social capital, whatever, to deal with unanticipated impacts from COVID-19, that downstream impacts that we're not seeing right now, and potential other problems. If COVID-19 happened, there's no reason that something like it, as bad or even worse, will happen at the same time. Yeah, bad stuff happens, and having two crises can happen at the same time. What if there's a major volcano explosion right now that sends smoke over most of, the continent in which you're located? That would be pretty bad, and it's not impossible at all. And then you would be kind of screwed. You'd have to deal with two emergencies at once. Not good, but quite realistic. Or, more realistic in the context of COVID-19 would be human error. Let's say that there's a major blackout that wipes out a lot of generators. So generators have to be rebuilt and people don't have power for a long time. That would really suck, but it can really happen. And that would be really bad, but really viable. So you got to be prepared for other things happening, unfortunately, at the same time. Now, this is the fun part, where you get to beat your competition. Moving quickly to prepare for COVID-19 will gain you a great competitive advantage. Really put you far ahead of your competition, those people who are slower to adapt, maybe because they're following the wildly optimistic government guidelines. So you gotta move ahead, move quickly, and you'll gain much more than a foot on your competition. You'll gain a mile on your competition. And your competition will be hobbled. Maybe some of them will be so bad that it will go bankrupt. So you gotta be ready, be in a good position to seize market share from your competition because you're prepared and you're not nearly as badly impacted by COVID-19 as they are. Hire qualified employees who are going to be let go by your competitors. So be in a good position to hire them and acquire resources. In the worst possible case for them, best for you, they will go bankrupt and there will be a fire sale of their resources, and you can buy those up, various resources at very cheap costs. So that's what you can do to prepare as a business. These are the steps that you need to follow if you want to protect yourself, your loved ones, your career, your business, everything that you care about from the wildly optimistic government guidelines. And they result from our own gut reactions that are dangerous, incredibly dangerous, especially during slow-moving train wrecks, disasters like COVID-19. So government is having bad guidelines because of these gut reactions, these intuitions, they're bad decisions, and it's very intuitive for us to also have bad reactions, these bad gut reactions to slow-moving disasters. You want to instead follow the right steps, follow the guidelines that I outlined earlier in this video, and you'll be much better off if you do so. So, this has been another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Guide, and as always, there's a blog on which this show has been based, so you want to make sure to check out the blog, which is linked in the show notes, as well as a lot of other blogs that you'll be interested. If you like this episode, make sure to click like and make sure to subscribe to this podcast for whatever venue you got your podcast. So do that. Leave your comments. Have any questions? I'll be glad to check them out and answer them later. If you want to follow us on social media, that's great. There's a lot of social media links that are going to be in the notes. Please make sure to check out the free 8 video-based module course, some course on decision making, the Wise Decision Maker course, 8 video-based modules. It's a free course. It's at disasteravoidanceexperts.com/subscribe. Again, disasteravoidanceexperts.com/subscribe. It's also linked in the show notes. If you want to go into much more depth about the topics I described in this podcast, make sure to check out my book, Never Go With Your Gut: How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. And finally, last but not least, I want to recommend to you that you do take the steps, that you protect yourself, your loved ones from the disasters caused by COVID-19. And I want to wish you the wisest and most profitable decisions, my friends.